to do real quick. Okay? I want y'all to divide into 2 teams. I've already counted, so it's even. Okay? There'll be 8 on each team. Okay? What y'all are going to do is y'all are going to come up with a news clip. No. You're going to come up with a news clip where you're reporting live from the scene of an accident. Okay? You're reporting live from the scene of an accident. Alright? You may want to reenact what happened. You may want to interview survivors. Okay? But you are reporting live from the scene of an accident. So y'all divide up into teams of 8. Okay? 2 teams of 8.
Yeah, just go to side.
Yeah, go to a side of the room.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We got our team.
There you go.
Dream team. We got Kenny. We're gonna win. Kenny! We got Kenny. You can't lose with Kenny.
Naomi, are you okay?
Wait, are they on the team?
You can't. No, they're not on the team.
Okay, here's the game. What kind of accident are we?
Is it a clip
Like a murder?
or is it like
That would be a hidden
Y'all plan out what y'all are gonna do, and y'all come up here and act it out. Okay, so Naomi, y'all are gonna plan out what y'all are gonna do, and then y'all are gonna come up here and act it out.
A bomb?
A bomb? It's a good thing we don't make any money on our YouTube videos, because we're not gonna make. We definitely wouldn't make any on this one. If I'm already hearing bomb.
So what is it has to one of you are the one who
Now remember, you guys, we're streaming this on YouTube, so it needs to be appropriate for that. All right, can't be flagged. All right, I'm gonna give y'all like 1 more minute to work on it. Teams, come back. Yeah, y'all come back in.
Why are you sitting on my chair?
Okay. What team wants to go first?
Well, we don't want to steal their fenders.
We're going
Okay, y'all. Okay. Y'all come on up then.
Okay, take the stage.
What am I doing again?
You can't say it out loud.
What am I doing again?
Okay.
I don't know what I'm doing.
And C.
Wait, are we going on that stage or right there?
On that stage.
Oh,
Okay.
jeez.
In
Is that on?
Yeah. So don't do anything that YouTube will find inappropriate.
And C.
What?
Got it.
Wait. Grandma, no!
An accident! What are we gonna do?
Oh no! Welcome to News. Let's talk about the upcoming news. Back on the news, a grandma got ran over. And now Jeffrey with sports. Yes, Jeffrey with
Go up there, Diego.
sports. Jeffrey with sports. Sports.
Diego, you're Jeffrey with sports.
I know I am, but I'm saying who am I interviewing?
No!
Jeffrey with sports.
All right. How do you know about NASCAR?
Grandma!
You're talking about sports.
No.
Last night's games.
No!
It wasn't legit.
Jeffrey with sports. Okay, we're passing you. Veronica with politics.
Hello! The upcoming election is not looking good for the grandmother, considering she is dead. Back to Lewis with news.
Thank you, and welcome to News.
So improv, not y'all strong suit.
Weather.
Oh. Oh, the weather day. Oh, there's a grandma ran over.
There's a grandma
Thank
ran
you
over.
for the news. Next, media.
Oh my god.
Due to influence of social media, a grandma got ran over by a reindeer.
And the
So
grandma.
Tragic.
This is so
Kenny's a
sad.
Thank you for watching News.
No, bro.
I love how nobody mentioned it was a hit and run.
Y'all just said
That's what you get.
Alright.
I love the way Glenn's gonna be the witness. We're all gonna interview him.
And then nobody interviewed Blaine.
That's what I'm saying. I was
He was
like,
okay.
I'll go with Diego.
You got
Yeah, sorry. It's over there.
Like you were some random witness who watched an old lady. You made your
Wait,
grandma.
Oh, y'all are using props too? Are y'all doing the accent right there? Where y'all doing it? Y'all doing it?
You need to stand right there.
No, you have to be involved.
Do you want one?
Do I want what?
A microphone.
Oh, thank you.
We're official here.
Right.
You know we have a real microphone. Okay.
That's.
Oh, we have? Wait.
No help. We need help. No help.
We have actual microphones.
No, we're good.
Are you ready? And scene. Hello, good evening, Bastrop community. Thank you for tuning in to KXWZNTWQX News. As for the weather, it has been canceled. Oh, breaking news! I'm getting reports from Kayla outside FBC Bastrop that there has been a volcano explosion.
Hey, lower the pain level. Okay, yeah. Anyways, back to Faith.
Thank you, Kayla. Your internship has been canceled.
Oh,
Grade 1, grade 1 has something from.
that
Haley, you're screaming.
Haley, I'm entirely sure that like your screaming got us another viewer. All right, that was a
Instead
long.
of becoming a church channel, we're just a Haley Screams channel. We get to
Did you
talk
tell me
about
this?
everything.
Did you hear her screaming?
I don't know, but we might need a new security because they don't come running up here or anything.
Yeah, for real. That's what I'm thinking too. Right?
Oh, that's my daughter? It's fine.
Okay, so in this morning's lesson, what we're gonna learn about, what we're gonna read about, is this moment where Paul is sailing for Rome, and he's warned the centurions that he's sailing with not to sail because they're gonna go through a big storm, and so they ignore him and they decide to sail anyways. And so what we're gonna be talking about is that God will use many of these people working together to rescue them, and we're going to learn about how we can help, or how we can be there for people who need us during their storms or during their hard times. Okay, so we're going to be in Acts chapter 27. We're going to start in verses 21 through 24. Does anybody want to read for me? Alright, starting in verse 21, it says, "Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, 'Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar." Excuse me. "And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told." I read an extra verse there, but that's okay. So here we see that Paul had advised the centurion, the guy in charge of this of the sailing of the ship, not to sail. There was a storm coming, and he told him, "Be best if you don't." And they didn't listen to him. Paul then takes this moment while they're without food, while some of them are probably injured, and he addresses them, and he gives them this message that he's been given from God. And he's urging them to believe what it said, not because he's saying it, but because it's from God. When we go to help someone in a difficult time, a lot of times what we tend to say is, or what we tend to hear as Christians is, well, God will bring you through it. You guys ever heard that? God will bring you through it. Just trust in God. It'll be okay. If we're honest, when someone says that to us, does it really help us? Not really. We're kind of thinking, "Oh, yeah, I know to do that." But it doesn't really fully help us. So let me ask you guys this. What can we learn from Paul about how to encourage people who are facing a difficult situation? We see that Paul kind of took this route of Here's what God has told me. What can we learn from Paul about how to encourage people facing a difficult situation? One thing for sure I think we can learn, if we look through Paul's letters and we look through Paul's life and we look through how Paul did his ministry, Paul never took his faith for granted. Paul was never ashamed. He never backed down from his faith. He was always fully in it. He writes in Romans chapter 1 saying, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the salvation to all who believe. It is the power of God. We see that Paul was not afraid to share his faith. And so like we can think, oh well, you know, when someone says, well, I'll be praying for you, we can kind of look at that and like be like, well, that's just like a band-aid over a bullet hole, right? Then, you know, we kind of feel like it doesn't solve anything. The fact of the matter is, though, that we need to understand that like Paul took his faith seriously, and when we want to encourage people and we tell them this stuff that you know can be written off as like, oh, that's just typical Christian mumbo jumbo speak, doesn't really matter, you know, tell them like just trust in God. What I think we can take from this is that when Paul went to say that, he wasn't saying it because he knew, well, this is what I'm supposed to say. It's not like Paul was trained by the apostles and stuff, but it's not like Paul like fell back on his training, was like, okay, in this situation, it's not like Paul was like a telemarketer and had like a binder and was like, okay, storm wrecked the boat, here's what I'm supposed to say. Paul said what God placed on his heart. Paul said what he felt the Spirit of God leading him to say. He wasn't just offering a vague, empty, vain statement that sounded holy. He was saying a statement that he truly, fully believed with all his heart. That's what Paul was doing when he was telling them about this message that he got from the angel of God. Yes.
When I read this at first, it was like the first thing he says is, you ought to have followed my advice. You know, I thought, well, that's kind of harsh. You know?
Yeah.
Like, I told you so. But then, like, if you keep reading it, it's more like he's tying it into, like, I told you this was going to happen and it happened. So now listen to what I'm going to say now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think it's more like a credential kind of a thing. Like I was right this time, so I'm going to be right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, yeah, when you first read it, it's like, Paul's like, I told you so. Okay. But yeah, I think you're right, Kathy. I think that Paul is really using this to like draw a comparison. Like, I told you about the storm. I'm telling you about this now. You know? Told you about the storm, that came true. Are you going to believe me at this time? You know? When people go through a hard time, it can be for a lot of different reasons. It could be bad choice, or because of someone else's bad choice. It could just be a matter of circumstances. But we, as Christians, need to be a source of encouragement and strength. Paul tells them in verse 22 to take heart, or maybe your version says take courage. He wasn't just trying to say something that would cheer them up. He wasn't just trying to be like, well, just look on the bright side. Okay? He was telling them like, take courage, because here's what God has told me. Here's why you can have courage. Here's why you can stand firm. Here's why you can be brave in the midst of this tragedy. Here's why you can be that. wasn't just an empty positivity. He presented them with a promise from God. Our faith should not be rooted in our circumstances or in what we see, but what God has said. If we root our faith in the circumstances around us, or we root our faith in just what we see, what will end up happening is when things don't go the way we want them to, or the way that we've planned, we say, I'm done with this. It's not working out for me. When our faith is rooted in what God has said, then when we come to those hard times, and let me share this with you guys. Anyone who tells you, well, God won't give you more than what you can handle, doesn't understand God. The point is for us to be reliant on God. If God does give us only what we can handle, how are we going to rely on God? How will we rely on the promises of His Word if all God ever does is just give us what we can handle? The point is to give us more than what we can handle so that we can put our faith and our trust and our very being in the midst of Him, so that way we know, you know what, I'm not going to be able to handle this, but God sure can. This is over my pay grade, but it's not over God's, and that's who I'm going to rely on. To have the belief that, well, God will never give me more than what I can handle. It comes from it's backed biblically, kind of. In the matter that Paul talks about, that we will not be tempted more than what Jesus was tempted. The fact of the matter is, though, that we are going to get more than what we can handle very regularly. And just like very regularly we're going to get more than what we can handle, very regularly we should turn to the Bible, to the one person who can handle it regularly, who can handle everything, who holds the stars in His hands and has them numbered and named. That is why we take courage in fearful circumstances, in hard times. Because the God who holds the universe in His hands also holds our life. When we put our trust and our faith in Him, and so now we're going to go on to verses 30 through 38. Does anybody want to read those 8 verses for me? Okay, thanks, Faith.
And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength. For not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you." And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea.
Okay, so here's the setting of what's happening now. They're floating in the ship. Maybe the ship is starting to sink. It's starting to go down. And so they take the lifeboats and they start to lower them down, saying the ship is lost. It's done. We need to get out of here. Okay? And Paul says all the men need to stay on the ship if they are to be saved. Which sounds counterintuitive, right? If you were on a cruise ship and it started sinking, how many of you would expect the captain to come over the loudspeaker and say, "We're sinking, but in order to save all of you, you have to stay on the boat. You can't get in the lifeboats." It's very counterintuitive, right? You're sinking in the ocean and the captain tells you, don't get on the one thing that will for sure save you, right? And so that's what Paul tells these crew members. He tells them, I know the boat's sinking, but if you want to be saved, don't get in the lifeboats. And then the men believe him, and they cut the ropes. They don't just bring the boats back up; they cut the ropes that attach the lifeboats to the ship. So there's no way for them to get on the lifeboats now. They cut the ropes. They cut them off the ship. How many of us, when we face a hard time, we have that one thing that we always go to? How many of us can say that one thing that we always go to when we face a hard time is God? Maybe instead of getting into the thing that we think will save us, or we think is the for sure thing that will save us, maybe that just turns into a hindrance into our growth with God. In those hard seasons, in those hard times of life. Maybe the key to growing is cutting those out completely. And so 14 days go by. 14 days have gone by since the ship has wrecked. And since the ship was torn up by this storm. And Paul says, all right, you guys have waited 2 weeks. You can eat. How many of y'all would have snuck a snack in between that time? Okay. Sully, okay. Okay. I think all of us would have snuck a snack in between that 2 weeks. Or at least tried to. Paul says, all right, it's been 14 days. You guys can have some food. So they get the bread, and Paul says grace, and he breaks it, and shares it with them. All 276 people. And it says in verse 38, when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now, what would be the importance of throwing out the wheat into the sea? It lightened the ship for sure.
The ship was just full of wheat, so it just immediately comes back up. So much wheat.
So much wheat. That would be a very big provision in the ship. And they threw it out. It was like they didn't have a need for it anymore. They got rid of it. Paul's actions encouraged the rest of the sailors to take heart and to eat also. Our actions are going to speak a lot louder than our words. So what are our actions telling everyone? What are we telling everyone? Are we telling everyone that we live by faith, or are we telling everybody that we're weighed down and laden by sin, though we proclaim faith? Paul's actions throughout his whole life showed that he believed God's promises. Read Philippians, where he tells the church in Philippi, you know what? I'd much rather go home to heaven, but I know that it's better for me to be here with you. Throughout the entire letter of Philippians, Paul has this attitude of, if I am to die, that's fine. Because for me to live is Christ. To live for Paul was Christ. To live for Paul was just Jesus. That's what he determined as life, was following Jesus. To the point where he wrote to the church in Corinth, in chapter 11, verse 1 of 1 Corinthians, he writes, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Our actions in the way that we live should so reflect Christ that it becomes a contagious type of thing. It spreads to other people, not as an empty positivity, God will get you through this, but because we've seen God get us through the storms before, we know he is faithful to do it again, and we know he is faithful to continue to do it to anyone who is facing the storms. And so now this ship is limping through the sea. And in verses 39 through 44, we see what happens. Who would like to read those 5 verses for me? Or 6. Thanks, Rebecca.
39?
Yes.
When it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with the beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and let them loose. Meanwhile, loosing the rudder ropes, they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for shore. But striking a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship around, and the prow set fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violent waves of the sea. And their soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners and lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land.
So the ship is going through, and the sailors see a beach off in the distance. And they're like, there's land. We're going to take this ship, we're going to turn it, and we're going to run it aground. And they have like this kind of like moment of panic. And here we find out that this ship is a prisoner transport. And that's why Paul's on the ship. And so they start to head towards the land, and not realizing it, they hit a reef. And the bow, the front of the ship, gets stuck on the reef, but the stern, the back of it, is being pushed by the waves. And so the whole ship is breaking apart and is splitting pretty much in half. And so at this time, the legion of soldiers that this centurion is commanding, these prison guards, have decided among themselves, we need to kill all the prisoners, because if any of them swim away and escape, Caesar's going to have our heads anyways. And so the centurion had grown a relationship with Paul and had wished to save him, and so ordered his men, if you can swim, jump overboard and swim to shore. If you can't, find a piece of ship debris, rest on it, and ride it out till you get to the shore. And so, what we see is that all of them make it safely. In verse 20, or chapter 28, verse 1, it says, "After we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta." So, all of these people were brought safely through. What we see is that these experienced sailors, using techniques that they had known, with training that they had been trained with, and everything like that, and doing their best efforts that they could, still caused the ship to crash. What we see is that everyone from this ship was saved because of God's promise. We see that God's promise held true then. We see throughout the Bible how God's promises have held true. And if you really think back through your life, in the good times and in the bad, you can really think through and see how God's promises still hold true. God never promised that we wouldn't face hard times. God never promised that we would never face difficulties. God never promised that we wouldn't struggle. The biggest thing that God did promise is that He's there through the storm. That He has command over it. And that He will bring us through it. And so this morning, I want you guys to think real quick and tell me an example of a person who has been someone who has been an example of faith and hope in the midst of hardship in your own life. I need the Jeopardy theme to play during these long, awkward silences. Your mom?
My grandpa?
Your grandpa? Huh? Your brother? Brothers? I think Miss Michelle's gonna be hurt. None of y'all said her. How does God's word give you courage during the storms of your life?
I think it gives you peace in the middle of the storm.
Gives you peace in the middle of the storms?
It doesn't stop the hard times. It doesn't stop the storm that's going on around you. It doesn't stop you from, yes, to some extent, it can stop you from worrying, but there's still a certain amount of worry that you have, or whatever it is that's going on. But it gives you a peace to be able to ride out whatever it is. Makes you realize that in the end, things are going to be okay.
And I think too, it's a testimony. I know one particular situation that I went through. I was at what I thought was my lowest, and just being in the Lord and searching, and just been like you said, I felt like I had that peace. I mean, I knew I had that peace. Only God can do that to me because anyway. And in talking with a friend of mine, coworker,
we started sharing stuff, and I said, yeah, a couple months ago I was going through whatever. And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, around that same time I would pass by your classroom and I just felt like God's presence was around you. And she was like, I looked to you, for prayer, because she's like, I was going through a rough time at that time too. She's like, but I just felt that God was using you to minister to me. And I'm like, what? I was at my worst at that time. And she's like, that's God right there, because only He can bring you that peace. And that's not to say that, I still had that worry or whatever with the kids and, just life in general. But He can only He can do that, and then use that as a testimony to others that He's gonna see you through it. So.
Absolutely. There are so many examples in scriptures that we could look to in difficult times. Stories that we see in Hebrews chapter 11 or the Psalms, or the many examples of prophets and apostles. What we see is that the scriptures are full of people that we can learn from as we face trials. But more than all of that, we also have the promises of God in His Word. The promise that He will restore us, resurrect us, reward us, and most importantly, He will never forsake us. That He is always with us, that His Spirit is with us, that He is in our lives. So this week, what I want to challenge you guys with this week, I know that some of us in here, we're going to camp. Next week, we got kids camp. Okay? There's opportunities for this to happen in the next 2 weeks. I want you guys to be looking for a way that you can actively encourage a friend or even stranger who is going through something difficult. Actively look for a way that you can encourage someone that you encounter in the next 2 weeks. Search that out. Look for it. Pray to God to present that opportunity to you. And get rid of the stuff that holds you back from relying on God and His promises. Some announcements before we close in prayer and everything. Okay? As y'all know, next week is kids camp. Okay? Start next Sunday. Alright? Some of us are leaving today, right after church, for youth camp. Okay? We will get to we will leave from here and we will stop at Buc-ee's. You guys can grab some snacks, okay, for the drive to Temple.
I didn't know this was allowed.
Okay. Alright. When we get to Temple, we will go to CC's. Now, a couple of things. Okay? When we stop, you guys will need to wear masks. That is from the camp. They're asking that whenever we stop, to have students wear masks. Okay? As we go in. Alright? Nothing wrong with that. Okay? We will have recreation time. We will not enforce masks during recreation. And what I have heard from the camp, as far as their mask thing, they're not enforcing it during rec either. Okay? In the worship center or in the dining hall, it's probably a very, very, very good idea to wear a mask. Because we are one of 29 other churches and 17 of 800 campers. Okay? There's going to be a
You
lot.
have the long wait in line for lunch
Well-
and dinner. Like, you know how long were you waiting?
Actually, the meal times are going to be staggered
Oh, okay.
to ensure that proper distancing can be acquired. Okay? So it won't be, it may not be a long wait, but it may be later than what you're used to. Okay? When we arrive at the camp, you guys will all need to stay in the vehicles. I will go in, turn in all the medications, turn in all the forms, turn in all the stuff that we need to turn in. Okay? And handle all of that, find out what cabins and stuff we will go to. Since there are 11 girls going, we will take the girls to their cabin first. Okay? Alright? Even if there weren't 11 girls going, we would still take the girls to their cabin first. That is something that I do. Okay? Girls get to go to their cabins first. Okay? Girls, y'all will have a plastic container like this big, this wide, okay, full of chips, cookies, all kinds of snacks. Guys will have the same thing, okay? We have approximately 135 water bottles for the week, okay? Try and save as many as possible, yes, or bring a reusable one like Netta has, okay? Here's the thing. Thankfully, it's going to be cooler than what it normally is in Texas in July. But you still need to be drinking lots of water, okay? You guys know the rule of thumb, my rule of thumb. You need to drink half your body weight in ounces of water, okay? So if you weigh 100 pounds, you have to drink 50 ounces of water, okay? That's a good rule of thumb to keep you hydrated anyways without running around and everything, okay? If you drink and I'll tell you guys when we get to the camp, we have sparkling waters, okay, flavored sparkling waters, all right. You can have one, but you have to drink a certain amount of water before you can have one, okay. If you drink a can of soda, you need to drink 2 bottles of water to replace the water that you lose from drinking a can of soda, okay. So, are there any questions about camp or anything like that? Cool. All right. All right. Do you guys have any prayer requests? Kids camp.
My grandfather.
Your grandpa. I want to pray for youth camp that we stay safe. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we will head to the sanctuary. Father God, we come before you this morning. God, we thank you for the opportunity that we can worship, we can learn from you, and we can pray to you, God. And Lord, we pray that you be with these students as we prepare to go to youth camp. The ones that are going to youth camp, God, I pray that you start working in their hearts to hear what it is that you have for them this week. And God, as we prepare to go to kids camp, I pray that you be with us all, give us the energy that is needed to be a light for you to those kids that attend. I pray for safe travels for us as we head to youth camp. And God, be with Dr. Edge as he brings your message to us, God. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, you guys, thank y'all so much for coming. Thank y'all for being here. Thank y'all for joining us online. I will see y'all guys next Sunday.